Well, welcome to episode 3 of New England Prevails.
All right, so I guess yeah.
How I'm gonna do that.
Oh God. I guess the first thing we'll have to do is get the debate stuff and all that out of the way first. We have good timing despite the interruption with different episodes, which is good.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So that's that was interesting. I didn't even pay as close attention to it this time as I did last time.
So you watched the whole thing?
No, I didn't I didn't even watch the whole third one. Just bits and pieces and stuff. I knew it was going to be a lot lower energy this time around, because he did the "I'll just let her talk" debate, and then he had his fiery response debate, and now it's just calmly laying out the facts mode. So that's
right.
More targeted at the people who have not decided yet.
Yeah, I mean, he was. I think he and Chris Wallace. I mean, Chris Wallace was the hero last night.
He's the real MVP.
His questions. Oh my Lord! I mean, they were tough.
Yeah.
They were like, you're really a bitch, and here's all the reasons why. But can you tell us why we should trust you? And it was pretty severe. And I was watching it here with some of my fam. I am actually in New England. I am in Connecticut right now.
Lucky man.
Which is a delight. Yeah. I was in Boston earlier this week, but yeah, kind of getting ready for this last showdown, and I think at best it was a draw, but I don't think she won any points. In fact, I think she's fucked up like she did last time, and the polls are going to tighten again.
Yeah, I mean, I just can't imagine a whole lot of people actually coming out. I mean, there's going to be the rabid cat lady contingent. That's for Hillary Clinton, that's the equivalent of the African American community for Obama. But it's just it's not going to happen, right? She's not going to get more Obama in 2008 when he was going up against McCain, who was the white bread guy. He wasn't even popular with Republicans because he was too moderate on a lot of issues. So he just not somebody who was bringing people out to the polls. Nobody was excited to vote for McCain.
Sarah Palin,
but Obama had right. I mean, that was interesting. But Obama had the first black president vibe. And he didn't say anything publicly that scared the piss out of people. And so it's hard to imagine Hillary getting the types of numbers that even he was getting, and all the polls that put her 1 or 2 up nationally in a one-on-one race, which doesn't happen because there's 2 other candidates. Even in those polls, they were sampling at D plus 12, D plus 11, and it just. Why? Why lie that much?
Well, because if there's one thing that this election, and last night Trump talked about it a little bit. I thought a second debate was stronger about this issue. But he's really revealed the media, political, nonprofit consultant complex that exists on the Eastern Seaboard. And I used to work at a polling company. There are some genuine people who really care how folks feel, but they go in to those polls with an agenda. Sometimes they're surprised by the results, but they weight those things. And then the press goes out and says, well, this is a 6% margin of error, but we're going to treat it equally in our poll average as Quinnipiac or something. And you're like, what? How did that happen?
Wait, so run that by me again?
It's there clearly are enough pollsters out there who want to influence the election by the perception that Hillary's way, way up or Trump's way, way down. And then the media feeds on that because they're rabid dogs and have nothing else to do.
Well, I think
he's luckily exposing some of that, but it's a long time coming.
I mean, in the actual debate, you get references to real conspiracy, like what the James O'Keefe videos have been revealing over the past couple days. There is a real conspiracy from the Democratic Party to rig, not really rig, but just like do all kinds of shady stuff that's been going on in elections for generations. Stuff that everybody knew, but he caught it on video. But there's a difference between that and what the pollsters are doing. I mean, it's like when white nationalists talk about a Jewish conspiracy. It's not necessarily that the conspiracy is Jewish. The real thing that they're talking about is not about Judaism. It's a conspiracy of Jews, not a Jewish conspiracy. In this situation, it's very similar. It's not a pollster conspiracy. It's just a bunch of pollsters talking to each other. And they would rather, just like the big bankers that get referenced, just like any industry, they talk to each other. And they would rather be wrong together than right and far away from the rest of the numbers. So it's not just that they are biased in the polling. That's sometimes really obvious. Sometimes it's very hard to prove. But what everybody knows in that industry, and anybody who's been in any industry ever, they look at each other's numbers, they talk to each other. And so it's not so much necessarily that the Washington Post wants Hillary to win, although that's probably true. It's that they don't want to have the only poll, and they don't want to publicize any poll that's far away from the rest of them.
Because then they can't look fraudulent.
And so when people say, exactly, and I mean, it's exactly like what happened with the banks before the financial crisis. Everybody else was doing it. They knew it was a bad idea, but they would rather be right as a community than wrong as an individual. And they would rather be wrong as a community than right as an individual, which is really scary. And so it's not, people get really into the conspiracy theories and stuff, and it doesn't have to be that they're meeting in a back room and saying, we're all in for Hillary, right? That doesn't need to happen. All that needs to happen is for the trendsetters in that industry to have enough pull with everybody else that it draws the trend like gravity.
Groupthink. And then you start doing your methods the same way. You start your and the worst part is the interpretation of the analysis. Because if you look at the data, anyone with half a brain can figure it out. But like CNN and all their after debate polls, like again last night, third time in a row. Now this poll was taken with a sample of now it leans Democrat, but these are scientific results, and then they say Hillary won 59 to 30 or whatever by respondents, and you're like, but wait a minute, this is the same result you had for the last two polls. You've already said they lean Democratic, and then they have the gall, despite all of that context, to put it up as a headline, says Clinton wins debate 59 to 30. And I'm like, if you just tuned in, that's all you get. And they don't understand that that's what bias looks like. Or that when he says we have some bad hombres in here, that he's not actually disparaging Mexicans or Hispanics in the country. like they just, like somebody said it great last night, and this kind of moves on a little bit from what we're talking about, but that like the media and journalists, they don't do journalism anymore. And I sound like a crank, but I swear to God, it's the truth.
No, it's true.
They've just been exposed this election cycle. But they take Trump literally and not seriously, instead of taking him seriously and not literally. And that distinction is really important, because they're focusing tunnel vision on things that no one watching it from New England to Middle America to the Panhandle in Florida care about or went through their ears. They're focusing on the actual triggers that made sense to them, that connected to them in the debate, not as little jibes and riffs, right?
Right. No, I mean, it's the thing that's so strange to me, and it's partly a generational thing, but do they not understand that they're destroying their industry? Like, do they not? Like, when more people are tuning in and being influenced by a Mike Cernovich Periscope than to major coverage by like billion-dollar companies. When, like, I get that they're kind of like in a Titanic sort of situation where the boat's just too close to the iceberg. They can't
Are you
turn
talking
it around.
about broadcast news or like mainstream publications in general?
Right. I mean, the entire mainstream media at this point is so committed, and it's so obvious. I mean, I said to my friends and family before Trump had even won the nomination that even if he loses, even if he lost the nomination, he's done so much work, and put so much into destroying people's faith in the mainstream media that that might be enough to achieve actual progress in the United States at some point in the future. Maybe not now, but he's sown a seed. People aren't going to forget this. They're not going to forget CNN being caught coaching the people responding to the second debate. This stuff doesn't go away.
Yeah, that's...
And you can bury it in the 24-hour news cycle all you want, but all it takes is one dude with a Twitter egg account to post a YouTube video with 200 views on it, and suddenly it explodes and people remember. They can't memory hole millennials.
Or the generation underneath us. I mean, the fact fact that the O'Keefe videos, and look, James, I met James. He's
Really?
he's down in D.C. He won a Young Conservative award a couple of years back.
Right.
Like, he had his new book. Like, he knows us over at Reason. Like, whatever. Cool.
Yeah,
he does these Go Native reports, and sometimes he goes a little too far, but at the end of the day, like, it's interesting content and stuff. And just because of his background, like, Donna Brazile, the chairman of the DNC, is calling this man a convicted criminal. And she's like, and they're not even disputing the content, which is what's so shocking. Whether it's the Podesta emails, the O'Keefe videos, I mean, they're not even saying like, "Oh, all this stuff is wrong." It's that, well, look who's interfering with our elections, as if that was the problem with what's going. Like that separation of reality and like what's important in truth is so vast that, like, like, this elitism is really damaging the health of this country, and it's a real problem.
Yeah, and I mean, I have a problem with the populist sort of aspect of it to a degree. I mean, I think anybody from New England, like, we don't actually have a problem with elitism. That's fine at some level. The problem is ideological consistency. The thing that's so frightening to me about the Podesta emails, the mainstream media, it's not that they're engaged in shilling for their candidate. That's, at this point, honestly, that's what I expect from most people. What's so ridiculous to me about it is that they can't project their own ideology into the future far enough to see where the problems are going to be. They're not smart enough to carry this off. And so, like, Podesta got hacked, and dude didn't even then authenticate the two-step authentication process. So he got hacked again. Like, that's not even a hack at that point. People are just guessing his damn password. Like, that's like your friend in college left their phone on the sofa kind of hacking. That's not like Russian conspiracy level
or you leave
bullshit.
Your Facebook open and Craig puts a portrait of Hitler all over your Facebook wall. Right.
Exactly. I mean, it's just the thing that's so unnerving about a lot of it is that, like, all the same people who were saying, Bush stole the election from Gore, all these people who said not that long ago that, like, the election process is rigged, all of this shit, are now jumping all over Trump for saying it's rigged.
But it is rigged.
I mean, you just can't, like, you can't be so stupid and be in the public eye to forget that you were going on television saying the same things that you're criticizing somebody else for just a few years later. You can't be that stupid. And so it, like, from the Podesta emails to Hillary's health, all of this stuff. The thing that's really scary to me is that if we're going to have elites and normal people, which I think is just how it goes. I'm elite on some issues because I have experience. I'm below a normie on other issues because I don't know anything about it. And that's just how human beings, that's how the cookie crumbles. But if we're going to have elites, we need to expect a little bit more from them.
Well, the elites need to be humble.
It's just sad.
They need to realize, just like you said, like you just displayed humility in that I know what I know because of my experience and knowledge, but I would never for a second try to assume expertise in areas that I don't have, like that Paul Krugman decides to violate that rule all the time. But I am curious because I think there's a difference between like the metropolitan media elites. So that really is New York and DC, Philadelphia to a very small degree, but that's more in like finance and law.
Right.
But they're like this cookie cutter club of consultants and lawyers, but this also, but I'm not even talking about the political elites because this is cultural, with, kind of these new age, hipstery, uber liberal, progressive folks. And I'm just wondering, like, in New England, because we're not a metropolitan-based society, like Boston is Boston, Providence is Providence, Hartford is Hartford, and all of the towns and cities, there's no love lost, but there's no envy either. So people live in the city, but you wouldn't say in New England that elites necessarily live in the city. In fact, it's probably quite the opposite. And so...
In a lot of places, yeah.
But the other thing that does, and I'm curious your view here, is that we then interact with people who are more elite than us in some other aspects. We just are involved with the more common or average way of life, even though elites might live out in the burbs or towns.
Well, it's the same. I mean, one of the things to me that's so interesting about New England, and one of the things that I love quite a bit, is that it is in many ways politically not what I would want, right? Like I don't want to live in a blue state, but the concern that people have in New England for their neighbor is genuine. They are voting for socialist policies because they genuinely want to use their own resources to help people who are going to die in the winter without their help. It's not the same thing. Like like we talked about before, I would rather deal with a Democrat from New England than a Republican from almost any other state. Because, I mean, if you look at the types of things that Hillary Clinton and her husband were involved with at the local level way back in the day, it's disgusting. It really is. And that there's a clear lack of genuine empathy for the people that they're pretending to care about. And it's very frightening. And I think it's just a totally different thing. The fact that there's this national umbrella term and organization for Democrats or Republicans or libertarians or whatever is kind of covering up the reality here, which is that if I live in a town where everybody agrees that they want to put their money together to accomplish a certain thing, that's fine. I don't have any problem with that. Because New England is so small and because the people do interact with city elites, if you can call it that, with intellectuals, with farmers, with factory workers, with every slice of the population. I mean, everybody's family is relatively diverse in terms of ideologies and life experiences, if not racially. And that concern and that empathy is genuine. When I look at Hillary Clinton, I don't see a single shred of genuine empathy for even her own husband.
They haven't slept in the same bed together for years.
That's disconcerting.
They don't love each other.
Right. Yeah. I mean... But I don't think she even has any empathy for Huma Abedin
because they're all pawns.
Speaking of people she slept with,
unfortunately, and again, I don't know whether to blame her. Like, is it her nature? Is it just the experience she's gone through as just having to be bitter and stuck it up because she's Machiavellian and, the ends justify the means, which is fine.
Right.
Like, actually, you know what? If you need to accomplish your goals, like, sometimes the process, reinvent the process. Like, cool. But what it has done to her, I don't think there's a more demonstrated individual who has been corrupted by their own process than she is.
Well, if you look back, it's not just about the things that people go through, it's also about their kind of inborn personalities. In order to have been successful as Democrats in the time and place where Bill and Hillary come from, they had to do a lot of unsavory things. They had to be friends with Grand Dragons of the KKK. That was a requirement, and they not only met the requirement, but they exceeded it. So they're the type of people who thrive in that kind of environment where, and so they are partly, I think, a product of their environment. They're from a certain generation. They feel certain ways about women and minorities and homosexuals and all kinds of things that we'll probably never hear them speak honestly about. But they're also the types of political animals that thrive in that kind of world. They're very much like the binge and purge kind of mentality, where they, like, Bill Clinton goes out and has affairs and pays for prostitutes and possibly rapes people and then signs something about, like, women's rights into law. Like, they do this sort of, like, sin and forgiveness sort of thing. And it's such a deeply New England mentality, right? Like, we're all about the long haul, living by your values, having genuine empathy and sticking to your guns. And they're all about, like, having a public and a private face, having, like, living in these radically wild swings.
But it's because no one really holds people like that to account. I feel like when you live in a small town or even a small city up here, and it's not even just the geography, it's the people. Like, you're held to account. The likelihood that your kids are going to, even if they move out for a little bit, will come back is higher, mostly because of quality of life and job opportunities because of the increase in the service industries. But the fact that you're going to be interacting with people on a daily basis who could vehemently disagree with you politically, religiously, on how to chop wood, like whatever the difference is, you have to interact with them, and so you build a thicker skin. You learn to get along, and you don't build up these unworkable shells that constrict you, and that at this point is so obvious to anybody watching her. Like, last night, my little brother, he just couldn't. Like, it didn't even matter what she was saying, and he is not political at all. He is like, I can't like her. What? It's like she was that repulsive just by her very nature, and it's just what she is at this point.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's something in the New Englander's psyche where we recognize, like, what Bill and Hillary, first Bill and then Hillary, accomplished was using the American political system and the shifts in the American political system to their own advantage. And the way they did that was by amplifying trends one way or the other. So when people were against gay marriage, they were loudly against gay marriage. When people were for gay marriage, they were loudly for gay marriage. They amplified trends. And that, everybody knows someone like that from their town or from their school who, they see two people having an argument and they egg them on. They see somebody is depressed and they sink down into the well of depression with them. And that's fine if you live in San Diego, where you don't have any real problems. That may be fine in Arkansas, where, like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? A fucking tornado once a year? Like, you don't have, like, real existential problems and challenges and things to overcome. And so, like, the puritanical kind of value of not inflating or deflating trends, but trying to moderate them. The value of prudence, just they don't have it really.
Well, there's an undercurrent of culture that I think stabilizes trends, that kind of puts it through a filter. And while I laughed at your San Diego example, like there is something to be said for folks that do kind of adopt, or I mean, early adopters are good in certain senses. But if all you're doing is consuming, one trend to another,
right,
and you're not necessarily producing anything original, not only do you feel like shit, but you have to keep going after trends even more to have a sense of
right,
self-worth, to feel fulfilled at all. And I think that does exist mostly in intense, dense urban centers where there's this groupthink, where there isn't an undercurrent of culture to stabilize trends. And then everyone, even if you just move into a city, you look up to the elites, or you look up to the people who are at all the fancy galas, and you're like, I want to be like that person. And so you start adopting their personality, their clothing,
right,
the things that they watch on TV, and like who are you? Where is your core? And
right,
that's her problem. She and Bill have both lost their core years and years ago.
Yeah, and they've replaced it with, I mean, if they ever had one, but they've replaced that ballast on their ship with money and power and privilege and all these things. Like, she talks about how, like, she hasn't driven in the past 20 years. When she talks about gun deaths and things like that, I mean, she's surrounded by bodyguards. It's so disingenuous. That
she said last night that she was against the Heller decision, the 2008 gun case, because too many babies and toddlers were killing themselves with guns. Was her opposition to it. So Cernovich posted something about Stewie Griffin with a pistol. And he's like, "You're absolutely right." But it's that I'm trying to weasel my way out. I'm trying to talk myself around inconvenient truths that I myself have put into the world. You just laugh at her after a while. But it's the thing is, and this is like, not to pick on Hillary, which we've been doing for the last half hour, but like she represents a cultural movement that actually rewards and likes that sort of style and that sort of demeanor and attitude, and it's very strange. And I don't know if it's because of identity. Like, do young women just adopt that attitude, which is mostly her base, because she is herself a woman? I don't know. It's just very curious.
Well, there is, like, I don't know if it's even possible to say that New England has really avoided a lot of that stuff, because New England is kind of the epicenter for a lot of the older feminist propaganda. But the women that I talk to from our age and older about this kind of stuff, like, they're on pins and needles all the time. Like, they just have this hair trigger reaction to fucking everything. Just everything. And it's always they're being attacked and they have to righteously defend themselves. And it's just this, like, non-stop kind of like soldier mentality of just, like, shoot back and then figure out what happened. Like, I was at a bar at a restaurant last night, and I was with my girlfriend and one of her female colleagues from her office, and they were talking about a man and a woman from their office who are married, and they were having troubles in their relationship and all this stuff. And I said some just kind of common sense about, like, usually when this stuff is going on, there's information that we don't have as people outside of the relationship. It's hard to know why women put up with stuff sometimes. Mm-hmm. And my girlfriend's colleague was just, like, genuinely preparing herself to be upset by what I had said. And then, without, like, my girlfriend didn't think about it as defending me, but she just explained what I was talking about and gave some other examples. And then her colleague was just like, oh yeah, definitely, I like completely agree with that. But she was ready because it sounded like men against women to just jump on it.
Well, yeah, that cognitive dissonance hit, and she wasn't prepared or didn't know
and
how to deal with new information.
She had a long day at work, and she was tired and all. Like, I get it, but that stirring up that kind of shit in people is just, I mean, what was it? I guess it's on Netflix. There's a thing about the witch trials in England, and in like southern Scotland and northern England mostly, where a lot of this stuff started, and King James wrote a whole thing about all this stuff and whatever. But they were talking about a lot of these, like, basically painting it as like persecuting women who were outsiders for whatever reason. But people from ancient history have understood that ideas can travel through a community like a virus. And so if you don't have a strong reaction to this kind of droning, sort of like hypnotic wave that will eventually eat away your resolve, then you end up with women who act witch-like. That's just what happens. And you can do the same thing to men, of course. That's what Hitler did. He was a wizard in Germany. He was using this kind of hypnotic type of speech to get the men ready to commit suicide for the fatherland, or motherland. And it's the same type of thing. If you don't nip that sort of stuff early in the stage of its progression, it does end up dragging men or women, whoever you're targeting, away from their own beliefs and their own values to the point where they attack things that they personally believe.
Right.
And it's crazy.
I mean, it sounds to me, it's a perfect case of community hysteria. And in our modern age where communication is so available and rampant and quick, like that kind of stuff, luckily, I don't think has the capacity to happen anymore unless you're completely off the grid, because the way to confront those ideas is better ideas, other ideas, and free speech. And that's why this censorship movement, which is beyond the PC culture from the 90s and the self-esteem movement,
right,
which I think was actually generally about don't hurt people's feelings, is now about actively censoring how you say things, coded words, everything's a dog whistle. And that type of stuff, especially when there is actual coercion involved, whether it's taking away funding from schools, citing people. And look, it's not that far in the Western world, in France. Like, you can't wear a certain, like the burkini is outlawed. Right. I mean, it's not far from our present culture, who we deem civilized nations. And so any person or political party or group, and you're talking about the Salem witch trials, but that thinks that certain speech or certain beliefs are hostile, like that's dangerous and scary and needs to be confronted immediately. And luckily it is, and the safe space stuff is finally being pushed back against. But like for a while there, I was real nervous. And
well,
I think
I'm of two minds about it, because at some level, like, it is worth being the kind of anti-social justice warrior people that you find, like Dave Rubin, like Milo, and in stuff like Gamergate, like Sargon of Akkad, and those types of people. But part of me is, it's not quite accelerationism, but similar, where just like, people need to understand that there are people out there that hate them. And hate them irrationally. It's not necessarily something that you can sit down with this person and have a nice cup of coffee and sort it out. It's not you said something and you need to apologize. It's not, they just hate you.
Right.
And people need to understand. And I think women, gay men, especially gay white men, are starting to realize that the people that they thought had their back have hated them forever. They just didn't say it. And that's the people reacting to Black Lives Matter, to the radical social justice stuff that calls for kill all white men, that kind of stuff. I think it's important for people to see this stuff and to realize that, like, it might not come for you, but do you want to have children? Like, for these women who are starting to look at motherhood seriously, and they were on board with this, like, patriarchy is awful. And then they start to think, well, what if I have a son? Do I want people to tell him that he's evil just because he's a man? That's horrible. Right. And they don't really get it when it's people saying nice things and people supporting other people in their quote unquote community. But once it starts to get too far, and even sometimes there is violence, people need to see how ridiculously dangerous some of this stuff is. Did anybody really not understand that Hillary Clinton was willing to go to war? Did it really take, like, they couldn't read her character?
Yeah. No, she wants, she's ready. Yeah. She's ready to go to war. And she's blaming Trump for being trigger happy. Although again, I do, off of what you just said is really interesting, because the social justice warrior movement stuff, it's easily mocked now.
Right.
But because it's being driven now from an elitist core, and a very educated core. Well, they have a degree. I'm not qualifying their intelligence. They certainly had gone to school.
That PhD in feminist geology.
Oof, he loves sociology. But I think the reason it doesn't have the traction because there's the moral equivalence of, well, this is the same fight as the civil rights movement, or gay rights in the 80s or 90s, or AIDS and all these things. And like, no, this is a broader, like, spell out of your concern seriously. And I just look at it from a tactical level, because for years libertarians and conservatives had been applying intellectual arguments to politics and thinking that, well, right. The taxes and regulation and here are all our policies and entitlement
taxation
reform.
Is theft.
Right, taxation is, well, even that actually has more persuasive weight than anything they've said before. And they were trying to use intellect and theory and supply and demand and stuff that just had no resonance with folks.
Yeah.
And I look at the modern social justice movement, and it appears to me, feel free to challenge, that they're making the same mistake that my movement had been using for years, because they're relying on feminist theory and trans theory and African American history filters and Marxism filters, and using words and ways to talk about problems and oppression in America that no longer resonate with the core people. So this angry elite bitterness is really now confined to these urban centers, and it's not, and that's frustrating them, because it's not getting to the broader mass public where you kind of got that validation that, yes, this is worth fighting for. Outside of Black Lives Matter, I don't see anything like what they had in the 50s and 60s.
Right. Well, I remember that exact same thing. I remember sitting in the Democrats Club in high school and thinking, like, God, what could we accomplish if we just got rid of all these working people? Like, that's the mentality. That's the idea, is like, and I can't remember who it was. Somebody from, I don't know if they were in the EU, like, organization itself, or a politician from Germany said something about, like, the problem now is not us in the government. The problem is everybody else. Like, the elites understand what to do. We can solve the problem. We're being blocked by people. And the WikiLeaks stuff, where they were talking about, like, we don't care if the people are uneducated. In fact, it benefits the Democrats, but they need to be compliant. And, like, keeping the masses stupid, silent, not going to the polls, that kind of stuff, that attitude, it's very short-sighted. You can't live in that world for long. And if your policy involves silencing 50% of the population, then what are you doing? Right. It doesn't make any sense. And the thing that's, I think, very disconcerting for these people is when you look at women who are stay-at-home moms. When you look at the Nation of Islam, who advocates segregation and back to Africanism, these kinds of, like, gays who are against gay marriage. This is the kind of stuff that really freaks them out.
Right.
Because the truth is that we don't all agree. There are different strategies here. There are different ways to go about stuff. Once you accept that there's going to be a government, a lot of the moral questions go right out the freaking window, because you're already in just like steal and rape, kill, pillage, and burn, basically. Like, that's your game plan. So everything else is just pragmatic question and answers. So I think that's the thing that is really important to witness what's going on, is that there are people who shouldn't have the ideas that they do and want to try things that the elite doesn't want them to try. And that's the thing that's really dangerous. Like, one of the things, there was an article in some tech blog or whatever about Peter Thiel. And one of the things they said about him is it was troubling that he was investing in homesteading. Or not homesteading, in seasteading.
Why?
Because it's a libertarian utopia, and that's scary for people who are on the left. They don't want that to happen. And so it's not just that they have a hardcore bias towards the left. They also have a kind of centrist gray goo sort of dream where they want everybody to be the same. They want everybody to have the same values, because in their model of humanity, you have to be in your little box. You can't get out of the box. And so one of the things, like this whole podcast, is about the idea that different regions, different peoples should try their experiments and see what happens.
Right.
That everybody's better off when New England tries its little New Englandy thing, and we survive and we like thrive or don't. And we do that on our own.
Diversity is not just your skin color, sexual orientation, or gender.
But even if it is, right? Like
culture diversity.
Even if you do want to boil it down to that, there's still problems for the left, because, or at least the mainstream left, because they don't want to accept that there are black people who want to live in an all-black country. Mm-hmm. And that scares the crap out of them.
Right.
Because, like, the Nation of Islam fundamentally agrees with the KKK. And that's they might not agree about who's supreme. They might not agree that white people are supreme to black people, but they agree that they should be separate for their own good. And that's the thing. Like, let them try it. They don't have to. Not every black person has to agree with this. But if there's 100,000 black men and women who want to make Detroit into a black nation, and they want to experiment with this, if they're all consenting adults, I'm not going to stop them. If they buy the land from the white people and they do all that stuff without killing anybody or hurting anybody to set it up, I think that's brilliant. Because if they succeed, then it proves something interesting. If they fail, then it proves something interesting. We all benefit. I mean,
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
We shouldn't be telling people that they can't have their safe spaces. If they want their safe spaces, they should try it. And I will laugh when it fails, but I will give them their honest shot. If they want to turn Yale into a safe space, then my children won't be going to Yale. It's pretty easy.
Right. Well, kind of off of that. I mean, I was reading in Time this week. There's this new report out about this new Russian military training schools as extracurriculars.
Right.
And it's interesting because it's not like our ROTC or cadet programs. And I was taking some notes. It's not. While they're saying it's not nationalistic, they say it has 3 prongs, and that it is military combat training, orthodox training. So for some reason, Putin wants to bring the Eastern Church back into the forefront, and then the third prong is Russian history. Right. And like pride in Russian history. But it's like you've got these kids who are 10, 11, up through age 17, fixing and reassembling AK-47s. They're practicing chemical fallout safety classes.
Right.
Like they're doing battle reenactments, learning Russian history, training with knives. Like I'm not, and the thing is, they're not even making this mandatory. It's like
you don't have to.
Here's a government program that they're doing after school. Come and do this. Come in on the weekends. And you're getting, like, every year these signups are going so intense. And this kind of goes back to the let a nation be a nation, let a people be a people. Because when that whole Crimea Ukraine mess was going on, and they annexed Crimea, and now they've got troops in Ukraine, like, they saw their sphere of influence and what they thought was ethno-Russian sovereignty slipping away to the West, this amorphous enemy of the West. But it's strange that they're trying. I guess it isn't strange that they would try this sort of public diplomacy effort on their own people to shore up a sense of pride, battle readiness, and also spiritual learning to kind of create, like, reintroduce a cohesive culture, as if he's anticipating something.
Well, the
conflict
truth,
to come. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think the logic behind it, the ethno-state sort of model, is one thing. But what's the reason that works is because a voluntary force, as long as it's not like sticks and stones against machine guns, will always be superior to some kind of drafted army. And this is what you're seeing, the difference between, like, hashtag Make America Great Again and whatever stuff the Hillary campaign is even trying to use, is that the Trump people are regular people who are doing this because they value it and they agree with it and they're willing to put their time into it. The Hillary people are being paid, and they can't keep up. They're just like, they cannot keep up with the political section of 4chan.
So it's the mercenary problem.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that people have been trying to answer. One of the questions that's been plaguing historians for hundreds of years now, if not thousands. Why was the Athenian army so damn strong? They didn't even train. They were just farmers. What the fuck is going on? Like, why were they beating professionals? Why were they beating slave armies? It doesn't make any sense. Because they volunteered. They would show up with a smile on their face. And that's
a song in their
changer.
hearts.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, they would be like, they would talk, the men of that civilization would talk about, like, oh, do you remember that one battle when, like, so-and-so got his finger chopped off? Do you remember that time when we were marching into battle and, like, my chest plate fell off? Oh, that was embarrassing. Like, they bought their own armor. They maintained it themselves. They practiced for fun. I mean, their attitude was voluntary.
Let's be honest. It was coming from, they have something worthwhile to defend. Mm-hmm. And I mean, slave armies, like the Persian armies that came into Greece at the time in their millions, were defeated back because they had no stake in the fight. They were forced to fight. Right. So their instincts of fear, of fragility, are going to come out. They're not fighting for any point of pride. And same thing with Sparta. I mean, even if you won a battle in Sparta, you came back to the same harsh militaristic lifestyle.
Right.
And that's why the Athenians kept it close with them. There was a pride in what they were doing because they were fighting for a culture, a history, right, and something that was bigger. I mean, their ideas were pretty revolutionary at that time. And I feel, I mean, I don't know, maybe every country feels this way, but they certainly felt like we're going to fight harder and better and smarter because we have something worth fighting for.
Yeah, as soon as you go away from property owners defending their property, you're on the downward slope. As soon as it's not people organizing to defend what they understand, you're basically weakening yourself at every step past that. I mean, why was the American Revolution successful? I mean, it was good timing. It was rough terrain. There were some advantages that were tactical and all that stuff. But the fundamental difference was the people fighting on the side of the colonies had everything to lose. And so they fought harder, they fought longer, they went through conditions that the redcoats weren't willing to deal with. They thought differently, they criticized themselves. They thought, okay, we lost that battle, why? Whereas the redcoats were like, we lost that battle, but we live to fight another day, we're going home in a year or whatever. Like, my tour is almost up, fuck this, I'll see you in the pub when you get home, brother. Like, they just didn't have anything to win. They didn't have anything to defend. And it showed. I mean, they were completely outnumbered, completely outmatched. The technology wasn't even fair. But they had the will to muscle through when they needed to. And so they made it too painful for the Brits to maintain their forces, and they won, technically. Although,
I mean, I was in Boston earlier this week, and for a little detour outside of this conference, a friend and I went on a duck tour, the biggest duck tour service in the country, I should say. 59 drivers, 27 trucks. I learned that.
Huge.
But it was a great little tour. But she did go through the Bunker Hill story, and I always recall it because it is interesting because the colonists took Bunker Hill in Boston. It was one of the highest points in the city. The Redcoats who were in Boston Commons saw him. They stormed the hill. The colonists who were, what was it, like 10-1? I forget what the ratio was. But like literally colonists are just firing down at them because it's their last stand. If they lose Bunker Hill, they lose the city. The Redcoats march up, boom, boom, boom. They have to retreat. Redcoats march again, boom, boom, boom. They march a third time. They take the hill because the colonists ran out of bullets and were shooting buttons from their guns. but the point is, the casualties, it was like 200 for the Americans and like 1,500 for the Brits. And so it was even though they lost the Battle of Bunker Hill, it was a huge turning point in the war. And it's those moral victories. It's those we're going to take a stand. And I feel like that's where the Trump people come from. Like, no, we're not going to be pushed on, regardless of how much money you throw at us in online ads and television ads, and you have this like 1,000 offices in every county. Like, we're still going to come out for the rallies, and we're still going to come out and
and we're going to buy lawn signs, and we're going to yell at people who try to take our lawn signs, and we're like, I mean, it's just in this election, it's very clear that there's an enthusiasm gap. And what I think is rattling, and to a large degree rustling, the global elite, which, I mean, you can come at that whole issue from a multitude of directions. But what's bothering these people, what's making them decloak and, post their little snide things on Twitter, clearly demonstrating that they just hate white men, that they hate Western culture, that they just want all this to be destroyed. What's making them come out from the darkness is that they know that they can't win if this continues. That if Brexit is a bellwether, they're done. They're so doomed. And that it's only a matter of time before the Germans figure out what's being done to them. And it's only a matter of time before the Swedes start waking up again. And
well, isn't it true that they're all, I mean, the Western European countries from Denmark and Norway all the way down to Italy are electing, I guess you would call them far right, but I guess in some ways they are anti-immigrant, nationalist figures.
Oh, yeah.
But I guess at the core, because no one really rallies around nationalism, I feel like it is a sovereignty issue. It is, we don't, whether it's foreign governments or foreign forces like businesses or institutions coming into our country, influencing our leaders, influencing our elites, and kind of corrupting our way of life. I feel like that's the resonant piece of why people are voting for these folks, that despite some of their faults, like Marie Le Pen's group in France, who very hostile to others, are getting a serious look and winning local races because of the sovereignty issue.
Oh, yeah.
And people still have pride in their own country. New Englanders still have pride in their towns and regions. And if urban global elites think that attitude is going away anytime soon, they are very wrong and in for a very rude awakening.
I mean, I think the same thing going all the way back to the beginning of this conversation, the same thing that happened to the pollsters and the mainstream media coastal elites, that's kind of a microcosm of what's been happening to the globalist agenda, where they won for so long and so uncontestedly that they got weak. And they forgot the fundamentals of what was really going on. And that you can take a lot from people. You can batter them into hating their own race, into hating their own gender or whatever. But you will eventually get down to a point where someone resists you. And as soon as the first person resists you, even if it's anonymously, that spreads like wildfire. And it's one of the reasons why I think it's so important for the world to have New England as its own sovereign territory, is that once that idea spreads through an entire generation, it sort of plants a seed that can never be completely removed.
But isn't it the natural progression?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, in some
devolution.
So, you're right. I mean, some of my colleagues talk about a libertarian, future or natural progression, and I don't know if I wouldn't label it libertarian, but it is once given technology and given where we are socially, the artificial coercion and artificial structures created by the national state and their cronyist partners in the economy and other institutions and in journalism. Once those artificial constraints and how we think and communicate break down, that's the way it has to go. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be devolution down to the last neighborhood and the last house in the neighborhood, but there is going to be a regionalism and a local identity that I think has to take shape, and already is there. It's just how does that flourish and blossom and sprout, and it kind of has to come from this collapse from the very top. And then every layer underneath of that begins to corrode. And that resurgence of civil society in these local regions, New England especially, I think is natural. I think it ends up happening regardless. It just depends on what the pace of that is.
Well, the preposterous thing, like I was just watching a YouTube video that was, from my perspective, frighteningly stupid, where there was a panel of students at the University of Cape Town in South Africa talking about how they need to get rid of modern science because it's a Western imposed ideology. No. Right? So I'm hearing this and I'm just like, not just face palming, but like praying for their safety. Because like I don't want them to do that to themselves. But the people that are supposed to be on board with globalism are not. Even the people who have the most to gain. Like the girl who was talking about this, or young woman at this university, the student, was black. She should be, like, by their logic, she should be on board with everybody becoming this gray goo of no differentiation, everybody's all the same. But she would be the first person to tell you, we have an identity, it's worth defending, it's worth risking a lot to experiment with it, to just find out about it, to understand it again, to reconnect with it. It's worth sacrificing science to get back to her roots, to that woman.
Wow.
And that's something, there's no amount of Soros money that is going to change this in human beings. You can't breed this type of thing out of existence. You can't chemical bomb your way out of this kind of thing. This is what people are. Mm-hmm. And I think the guy who I found that video through, who you might know on YouTube, his channel's called Some Black Guy. He's amazing. But he was reacting to it like, no, this is wrong, this is terrible, and he was coming at it from like a social libertarian kind of aspect. But I think on the right and on the left, we have to start accepting that people are different. They're allowed to be different. It's good in many ways that they're different, because the future might depend on black South Africans from one region coming up with an answer to a question that's unlikely for anybody else to think of.
Right.
We may be invaded by some kind of alien species, and the cure to their bioweapon comes from a Southeast Asian tribe that nobody's ever heard of. We survive as a species based on our differences, not on our similarities, because our similarities don't unite us at all. We all want money. We all want each other's money. That causes war, right? Our shared dreams are the biggest problem that we have. The thing that saves us and the thing that drives us forward is that we're different, we compete, and that we have some humanity and we can treat each other with empathy to some degree, but we have to pursue things with whatever group makes sense to us.
Right. But it's also, I mean, and again, feel free to disagree, but I've long held the view that a lot of these attitudes or incentives for competition, individualism, the things that do make us different are biological in nature. And by that I mean just genetically the same types of people who get together, who have similar impulses, kind of breed people with similar instincts. Is kind of the basis for this argument that I'm about to just lay out. But if you think about it, in America, regardless of when your ancestors came here, whether if it was with Roanoke or at any point, like the people who made the risk and the jump to come over here, first of all, exemplify a higher risk tolerance than anybody else. And I think that is inborn. I think it's very hard for cowards to risk their families' lives and wealth to come across the seas and live here, whether that was in the 1600s or the 20th century in Cuban boats. There is a higher degree of willpower in those types of people. And at the same time, when they get here, you're forced to be industrious, and you only survive and breed based on the fact that you can make a living, survive in pretty intolerable conditions in a vast country where no one's looking out for you but yourself. And my theory is that over time, these traits, these impulses have been bred into American DNA. And even though we get new immigrants every day, they have to adapt to this is what most of the population feels. Even if the media and politicians tell us to think a different way, there is this impulse of, nope, I can't, like the girl you were just talking about. Right. It's like, I need to be rebellious. I need to be contrarian. I can't conform. This is wrong. This doesn't feel right. And I'm biased because I'm American. You're an American. But I feel like that's very distinct and very different than if you were brought up in some other culture around the world. I think
my personal experience would lead me to believe that that's a trait in specific ethnic groups, and perhaps around certain levels of intelligence. I think what's so fascinating about especially people who are from New England, who are the descendants of people from very specific parts of England, is that we have that weird combination of relatively high average intelligence, but also a type of recklessness that leads us to creating problems for ourselves, solving problems in dangerous ways.
So I think that's is really the problem.
Aren't they usually?
Yeah.
But I think there may be certain groups that are better suited to that than others. And I think that shows in the statistical success and failures of certain groups in the United States. But I think there's a way to see if this is, there's a way to find out the truth. And the way to find out the truth is you let self-identified groups gather together. And whether that's white dudes who want their, Northwest Territory state thing where there can be only white men ruling everything, let them try that. And anybody who wants to live among them, who they accept, go for it. The people who want to live in a multi-culti sort of let's all intermarry and see what kind of human beings we can create, let them do their thing. I mean, I think it's where the globalist argument completely falls apart is that everybody understands at some level that we don't know. We can't possibly know with 100% certainty. And so the best way to find out is to give it a shot. And that's true in Asia, it's true in Africa, it's true in South America. I mean, it goes against people's fundamental instincts everywhere. And I think every group can agree that the best way to prove yourself right is to try. Mm-hmm. And so whether that's the safe space SJW type of people or the Nation of Islam or whatever. I want to know. I genuinely want to know if they're right. And so, I mean, I have my own ideas, but I would be willing to even help them achieve some of this stuff. And it's ridiculous. And I think it's so funny that the thing that people are really worried about, they don't want to talk about black on black crime. They don't want to talk about all of this stuff because they're worried it's going to tear the country apart. But the thing that actually unifies every single group on the planet besides globalists is that we're all kind of down to try. And it's like, they're the ones keeping us from trying these things.
Right. Yeah, they're the barriers, or the artificial barriers to progress.
And we have to get away from that and let California be California and let Texas be Texas and let everybody give it an honest shot. And if one group proves that they have a strategy that's effective, then the people who can have a little bit of self-criticism and figure out what's going on, those people will be able to adopt it and alter some things, and they'll be able to progress in different ways. But I think the Bernie people, the Trump people, the Gary Johnson people, as wishy-washy as they may be, the Jill Stein people, there is a growing consensus that people with big ideas should be trying them now, and not be blocked from attempting to achieve this stuff. I mean, how many lives could have been saved if the rest of the people in Europe had said to Hitler, like, okay, you try this in your borders. We will, like, the Jews that you don't want, the whoever, they can come here if they need to. We can figure this out somehow. You guys try your, like, ethno-state thing over there, and we'll check back in with you in 5 years.
I mean, that would have been delightful.
It didn't have to go that way.
Well, try to, invade everybody, which was part of the problem.
Yeah, and that's where you say, like, here's the limits of this, right? Like, if we give Louis Farrakhan Detroit, and we say, like, okay, the Nation of Islam can have this as Mecca, you guys can give it the old college try, and then they start, like, invading small towns in the neighboring areas, then yeah, like, then you've got a problem. But I think a lot of people are more committed to giving their ideas a shot than, like, dominating the world at this point. I'm not sure, like, the Genghis Khan genes are kind of dying out.
We just need that coercion of, I'm gonna tell everybody how to live their life, or this is how you should prefer to live. Yeah, right. That's the thing that needs to be, extricated.
Well, that's just like that that woman in South Africa. She wasn't saying we need to get rid of science in the West. She was saying that she didn't want to live in a community that was dominated by an idea that she didn't like.
Right.
That's fair. I have no problem with her. And it's interesting that now, like, I have to disagree with, like, some black guy who I think is fantastic. A lot of his videos are amazing, but I have to disagree that, like, she's not being unreasonable. I wouldn't want to be her neighbor, but she would not want me to be her neighbor. So we're right. Totally fine. And I think that's going to be the next sort of tough pill for people to swallow, because there's the alt-right white nationalist section of the Trump support, and they kind of already get this. And there's even some black nationalists who are on the Trump train as well, who get this as well. And those two groups can talk to each other and have a conference and come away friends. But there's a group of people who are still down with the, like, everybody has to do this. And that's still a kernel of what's going on with Trump and what's going on with Clinton. That they want everybody on board with their thing, but they don't really want to prove it.
Well, yeah,
and
you can't convince
that has to be resisted, whoever wins.
That you're right. You can't convince half the country that this is the way things are supposed to be. But yeah. I think there is legitimacy in saying, regardless of whose vision is better or worse, because neither of you are correct. There is no correct vision.
Right.
It's who are you to use the federal government to tell me that that's the case? Like,
right, and that's why I have to vote for Trump over Clinton, is because he's less willing to use force against people. And that as much as I disagree with him on his vision for America, which I fundamentally do, it doesn't bother me that much because he's willing to pursue his vision with words and Clinton can't. She has proven time and time again that her words are insufficient to prove her own points.
Yeah.
So why should I listen to her, right? Like that. Then if you don't have enough confidence in your own ideas, then I'm not going to have confidence in your ideas either.
She's not. She can't present a vision. She doesn't have one, right? Because she doesn't have that core. There's no belief system there, but power for its own sake.
That's what people on the left keep saying, like, oh, why can't we just get anybody else other than Hillary Clinton? Well, because she's the perfect representative of where the left is right now.
Absolutely true. Yeah.
And she is like, there couldn't be a better representative of what's going on. It's exactly what happened to McCain. I mean, there were so many people a decade ago who were saying, like, oh, McCain should run for president. But by the time he got to it, everybody was like, oh, this son of a bitch.
Right, yeah.
And Clinton, like 20 years ago, people were like, yes, this is going to be the first female president. People started writing screenplays about her being
Look
president.
Look at all the TV shows.
She's been a character in TV shows, right? Like, guess what, guys? You got what you paid for, right? Like, this is exactly what you wanted. And now you're going to complain about it. Now she's not good enough. Well, the reason she's not good enough is because you don't have any fucking ideas. Just like Mitt Romney, just like all these guys who came before who had no ideas. And it's ridiculous. But I think if people can defend their mistrust of the media, if they can start to defend their own identities a little bit, whoever wins, that's a great step forward. I actually hope that social justice warriors come out of this feeling more social justice-y. Because I want them to try. I want them to really give this a shot. I want them to have Social Justice University and see how many people read their papers. They need to know.
Well, and hopefully they hold their whole movement to account. I mean, the fact that they're already saying, well, if Hillary wins, we're going to keep her toes to the fire. Like, if there's anything that Bernie Sanders did that was productive, it was create a faction of the left that questions the tribalism of the left, that says we all have to agree and we all have to fall in line, because if we don't, we won't be in power anymore. And at least there, even if I disagree with the principles, the left faction that is principled and they see themselves as moral, social, very social justice-y, they're going to be checking their own. And like the Tea Party was checking their own. Like, every group deserves what it gets. None of this is an accident. These are clearly connected. I'm not going to say humanly coordinated events, but they are deeply connected to each other. And it's just kind of the self-fulfilling prophecy of where these movements are. And we're going to get what we're going to get. But I'll tell you what, New England's going to be just fine, because we don't need any of them, and they're not going to come here. They're not going to move here. So.
Right. I mean, that's the ridiculous thing. Like the Ghostbusters film was a perfect example of this, where like they got this huge budget to make this movie, and then pissed off more than half the audience, and then were surprised when it didn't do very well. Like. Look, guys, like, you can't do this forever. You're running out of road. And it just, when your greatest hits are behind you and, like, your points have been repeated over and over by the mainstream media for long enough, it's over. Like, when your greatest days are behind you, it's time to pack it in.
No one.
And that's the thing about. That's the thing about New England, is that there's no limit to the potential. And that's the fundamental difference, and the reason why. I mean, I don't have as many qualms with people that I disagree with in New England, is because we all agree that just keep moving forward and see what happens.
We're all striving for the same beach house, right? At the end of the day, that's the pot of gold.
On the well, I guess the lucky few get to have their beach house near sand. But for those of us that get the rocky beaches of Maine,
Or a
it's,
lake, God forbid.
yeah, it's a bit of a bitter pill.
Yeah.
But
Well, that's
it's so great.
That's what driving in cars is all about, coming down to the shore. Oh boy.
I like the rocky beaches. I like the sort of self-flagellating aspect of having fun. What is his name? The guy who played PC in the Mac and PC ads.
Oh God, yeah. No, the dorky guy.
Yeah, he's from New England.
Of course he is. Yeah.
And he had a great thing about like how Maine, especially Maine beaches, like it's called vacation land because it was called that before anybody found Florida. And like it is a serious commitment to like torturing yourself where like you're freezing cold in the water, you burn yourself on rocks. Like it's kind of brutal. But that's the thing, right? Like this is why like it's the combination of the people and their genetics and their culture and all that, but it's also the weather and the geography of the places itself. Like it's if you live a cozy bike ride away from the beach and you can bring your surfboard and whatever, like you have a very different mentality than somebody who has to like walk across burning hot rocks to get to the freezing ocean. Like it's a totally different world.
We just love the water too much. We'll do anything for it.
It's fantastic. But that like even when we're having fun, it's like painful. And this is the thing. Like there was a great video on YouTube of translating English into Minnesotan.
Oh boy.
And it's this really hilarious guy, and he's talking about how like you can never be too positive as a Minnesotan. Like it's not about being positive, it's about a double negative. So if somebody's like, how are you doing? And if you're genuinely doing well, you have to say it could be worse. And like, I'm not dead kind of idea.
I'm hanging in there.
Right. And that's the same thing. Like it's about moderating. Like you shouldn't ever be so depressed and you shouldn't ever be so like relaxed. You have to maintain some level of like paying attention to your shit.
Level of discomfort. Yeah, it's important.
But it's true, and it's general human health. Like the way people sit and the way people's postures are, it's because they don't want to maintain certain levels of muscular tension at all times. They just don't want to do it. They're too lazy. But that's the difference. It's focus, right? And that's the difference. Like the type of sloppiness that's been seen from the Democrats, from Trump, from the supporters of all these things is like that's the fundamental thing that we have to resist that. We have to resist the like comfortable AmeriFat bullshit and like recommit to doing an honest day's work and getting an honest reward for it.
I mean, you said it right. It's focus. I mean, the minute you stop paying attention to what you're doing or what you're saying, it all goes to shit. Like that. That is the key of like Eastern philosophy is like you need to be present and focused at all times, or else things are gonna fall by the wayside. And anecdotally, that's when I'm at my best is when I'm fully present and a full attention, and it's hard to maintain. That's why in Dungeons and Dragons, concentration is a skill.
Right. It's not just a fact.
No, it's not.
Yeah, and I think that's something as New Englanders, I hope people start like being proud of other people when they see them displaying these traits and encourage this in them. And like, if you do nothing else, even for people from Massachusetts who vote for Hillary Clinton, as brain dead as they may be, if you start rewarding socially the people around you for doing the right thing, it's a game changer. And I don't expect that in Kansas. I don't expect that in California. But I think we could actually do it. We can pull back from that brink.
You mean giving people the benefit of the doubt? Is that kind of your...
No, giving them the props they deserve for doing the hard thing. And doing that socially and face to face and even on Facebook or whatever. But just like, I think we've got to stop rewarding like girls in bikinis on Instagram and start rewarding like people doing a hard damn day's work. And that's
chopping wood. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the micro dirty jobs sort of mentality. I don't think that is anywhere else in America besides like New England and maybe upstate New York sometimes. And so I mean, I guess parts of the Midwest as well. But we've got to, if we can do that, I think it'll be a game changer.
Yeah. Yeah. It's correcting the incentives and the validation. It's a goal. It's a goal we should all carry.
Yeah.
Any parting thoughts as we close out today's cast?
One very short little story.
Yeah.
When I was at the bar last night, there was a guy who was pretty intoxicated, and he was like from before he even entered the place. But he was talking about how he had to go home to New York City because his family needed him. And like everybody, like people were kind of talking to him. They were sort of leaving him alone because he was pretty fucked up. But when I was sitting there with him for a little bit, I was just talking to him, and I was like, you know what, man? Like, it takes a lot to get yourself out of your rhythm and do the right thing for your family. And it had like a visible impact on the guy. He was like just really happy to hear somebody reward him for doing the right thing. And like leaving the comfort of his little bubble to do the right thing for his family.
Yeah.
And that's all we got to do, right? Like I don't want to have to think about politics that much.
Right.
And I don't think we really have to if we start talking to our friends and neighbors and family again. And
we need to reconnect as people and be there because if you can't be there for your family,
right.
how the hell can you be there for friends or
Right.
or coworkers or your broader community? You're not if you're so into yourself
Right.
and help others, the others that bore you and love you unconditionally, then you're right. I mean the political implications, your cultural relevance. I mean that's all going to be distraught. So yeah, no, that's a very that's a great story. Yeah.
I think that's the way we do this. I think like I don't want to vote on like secession and all that kind of crap. I just want people to start like showing love where it's due and showing respect where it's due, and not to just like stupid brainwashed nonsense. Just like shake yourself out of it a little bit and like say thanks to your neighbor for bringing the trash can back in when you forgot it. Like if we can start like showing the proper respect when it's due, I think that's a huge advantage.
Get a little humanity back. Yeah.
Yeah, and start nurturing the people around us for doing the things that we genuinely care about.
Awesome. Well, a very positive and uplifting conclusion, contrary to previous casts.
You know, you've got to end it on a little bit of false hope.
Right. Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us today, and as always,
New England prevails.